Excellent, cool. So, welcome then everyone to the ds-incubator about working with remotes. And in particular, we're going to be talking about the setup that is referred to as hours. The name comes from the book Happy Git with R, and it is nice that they haven't given a name to different setups, so it's kind of easier to communicate. And the focus is going to be kind of comparing this setup that is simpler to the setup that I have been kind of generally recommending, which is the fork and clone setup. It's called fork of hours. So the objectives of today is to compare those two setups, also to understand what this simpler setup looks like, and then discuss some of the pros and cons. And there is where probably I will need more of the help of Alex, because I use the setup that I'm going to be talking about today relatively less than the workflow that involves forks. So maybe someone with more experience with these setups may understand more of the nuances of it. And we are going to also going to cover how to switch from one to the other. And that is a task that I do often, because depending on what I do, sometimes I do need one setup or the other. So visually, this is what the two setups look like. Before, we have been working with this one here on the right that calls this fork of hours. It is fork because on your user account, you have a fork of the original repository, and the owner of the repository is not you, it's your organization, for example, you work for, in this case 2 degrees. And because we are all members of the organization, we could request access to push commits to the upstream repository, to the main repository. And therefore, there is connections to everything. So from your local repository here at the bottom right, you could push commits either to your origin, to your own user account, or to your upstream. So that is, for example, the setup that I use. It is more complex, but it, of course, gives you a lot of power and flexibility. And then on the left-hand side, there is a simpler setup where you don't even bother creating a fork of the main repository into your account. So you just push and pull from that one repository. And that's totally fine. And sometimes that's the only way I can do some things. So this image here shows the output of a function in R that comes from the use this package that is called git sitrep. We have shown this function before. It lists a few things in relation to Git, to GitHub, and so on. But in particular, I wanted to highlight the differences in terms of your readiness to create pull requests. So both of them support the approach where you create a pull request for any change that you want to submit to a repository. So the forking does nothing. It doesn't mean that the fact that in one of them you do not fork, it doesn't mean that you do not create a branch. So you always create a branch and you always submit a pull request, and someone should review that pull request before it's merged. But on the left, I'm sorry for the very dim colors here. What I'm showing is the output of the hours setup that shows that I have a remote called origin, exactly as the image showed before, and it is pointing to the 2 degrees investing, in this case, the repository called demo. And then I can push. So that confirms what the image that I showed before does. So, and it's also saying that there is no such a remote as upstream. Okay, so let's go back to the image, exactly this setup. So there is one origin, there is no upstream, and I can push to this repository. And to the right, we have the other approach that I have shown in previous meetings, where I have an origin, I have an upstream. The origin points to my user account, and the upstream points to in this case, 2 degrees. And I can push to the 2 degrees, so I can push to upstream. And the origin has been forked from the 2 degrees investing. So this is just in code showing or confirming locally in my repository, what setup I'm using at any given time. We still haven't discussed why you could use one or the other, and that's, I think, a question that Daisy rose the other day, and I would need the help of Alex to kind of explain more about the setup that we're talking today. So both setups, again, I highlight that work with, we encourage you to work with branches, do not, work on master, and encourage reviews of those pull requests. There is a little bit of information here, probably too much to read, so I condensed that in a table. This is mostly for your quick reference, so when you're a little lost and you want to review, okay, what was each of them doing. So this, I think, summarizes it well. So if you're using the use this package, you can create both setups with the function create from GitHub. The only difference is that you have to pass the argument fork equals false to get the hours set up, and you say fork equals true. This should be lowercase to get the fork of hours. It makes sense. And in terms of the branches, so your master branch in your local repository will be, what's called tracking. It means that where it's going to be like pushing commits and pulling commits from. It's going to be tracking the master branch on the origin remote, because it's the only remote that you have when you have the setup that we are talking about today, the hours. So master locally tracks the branch with the same name on the remote origin, because that's the only one. And compared to the other approach where your local master branch does not track your upstream, your origin master branch, instead it tracks the changes that are happening on upstream. Maybe this is a little bit technical, but it has to be documented somewhere, so you can come back to it later. And all of these setup things are happening automatically if you use the function from the use this package. And if you don't, then it is even more important to understand the details, because you have to set that up manually. When you create pull request, so you have a new branch, in this case, let's pretend that it's called PR branch, then your local branch on your RStudio or whatever you're working will be tracking in the simpler setup, will be tracking the only remote that is available. So there's going to be a corresponding branch on origin, and that is what's going to be tracking. And in the case of the fork approach, it is also going to be tracking your origin, because you first push to your fork and then you submit the pull request to upstream from your fork. Again, I acknowledge that this is technical, but you might need this as a reference in the future. And this is the bit where I'll kind of shut up and let Alex explain a little bit what he sees as the pros and cons of these setups. So please, Alex, go ahead and help me, maybe so I can correct this. Cool. Thanks a lot. Good. So I think the sole fact that within the same organization, different teams choose one or the other is just an expression that, as far as as long as one understands what you're doing and you can find the right tool for the right job, as they say. The only issue with that is that for those who are not super interested in these kind of technical details, it's kind of probably overwhelming to say, hey, you have all these trillion options. So I said, well, so what do you recommend, right? What should I do? So I guess that the answer to that is like, let's talk about it, and I'm here to help. So if anyone is wondering, if you have an opinion and can have good arguments for it, then go for it. And that's the purpose of this kind of discussion, so that everyone is, has the resources or links to the resources to learn more. But then, if you're unsure, just check with us, and we will try to recommend something that works for your scenario. Do you have a question here? I wanted to cover a little bit of how to switch from one to the other, and then the aspects of safety that make working with any of these two safe. But the pause here. Do we have any question based on what we have covered so far? Yeah, I offer in the workshop. Actually, we're gonna be putting this in practice, and it's gonna be totally up to you if you want to. If you really want to practice this, there's going to be lots of opportunity. And if you don't care about GitHub flows and stuff like that, you can just focus on learning the tidyverse, for example. But I will be encouraging you to practice, because this is the kind of thing that it doesn't become natural until you do it a million times. And by presenting you with the tools that abstract of these details, I also give you the same interface that, for you as an R analyst, it should be the same to work with one or the other. So it's just a matter of setup. It's just that argument that you set for. If you use this, for example, the change is just changing that argument, and one setup will be magically happening or the other, and then the way you work is very, very similar. And I want to experience that tomorrow on Wednesday and Thursday. But then the risk of this magical thing is that when something does go wrong, and with Git and GitHub always something goes wrong, is that it's important to at least know where to go for more information. This is not fun. I know it, and no one that is doing analysis should spend too much time on this. So just know that this information is here. You know where to come back. You know who to contact. But the experience for you as an analyst should be fluid, and that's what I'm going to be thriving to do tomorrow and the day after, showing you that once things are set up, even if you don't care about the details, it should be more or less pleasant, and it should just work. The challenges are more human challenges, are the ones that Alex highlighted. So the practices that make that computers will do what they do, but we humans may make wrong decisions, and that's what I wanted to cover next. So what the basic things that I know of that we could put in place to work safely, and maybe Alex knows a bit more about that. So there is here information about how to switch from one setup to the other in R and also in the terminal. So I'm not going to spend any time on that. And in terms of safety, as far as I know, there is two levels. One is the permission level or the repository, which the organization, so 2 degrees, has set the base role for anyone who joins the organization to any new repository. The base role is the lowest that you can have, which is read, which is a safety measure, so that you can't create harm unless someone changes your permissions on one repository to actually say push to master, right? Of course, if you create the repository, you will be an owner of that repository and you will have permissions to do anything. But if you're invited to a new project by someone else in their 2 degrees organization, by default, you shouldn't be able to create harm, and it should be someone giving you permissions to push to master, and only then any mistake could be difficult to undo. But in any case, we are working with Git, which means that almost anything that you do is undoable. It's just that it's going to take someone who knows about Git. Also, I want to highlight that as far as I understand, owners can override pretty much every rule. So that's one issue that we need to kind of also solve, that I think that we have too many owners in the 2 degrees organization. Like people like me, I don't know if I should have privileges to remove everything, so maybe not, likely not, and I do. So that's something that evolved that way. And finally, protection rules. So by default, when you create a repository, as far as I experienced it myself, the repository comes with the master branch unprotected, meaning that you can basically change the history of everyone's repository and create a lot of conflicts. And the best thing, as far as I understand it, is to protect the master branch, at least to avoid forced pushes. So with that, I will leave the last couple of minutes to Alex to expand on safety and anything that I said that was wrong or could be complemented. Do you mean this? I mean, the fact that by default, when you protect the branch, forced pushes are not allowed, or do you mean anything else that I may have missed? Like this kind of protection, you mean? Right. Cool. Yeah, yeah, good point. Okay, I think that also brings us to the end, so we'll need to probably wrap up. Anyone here wants to? I'm sorry, Alex, I cut you in the middle of something. Go ahead. Maybe. Okay, thank you very much, everyone here. Hopefully, this will be also useful for anyone who watches the recording later. Okay, thank you very much, and for those who for those who come tomorrow to the workshop, my recommendation is to work from anywhere that you have a reliable internet connection, and that might not be the Berlin office. That's it. And have a look at the tidyds repo, which has some information for setting things up. Thank you. Bye bye.